Tacky old woman. You're just bitter because my parents have money. Daughter-in-law shouted at me during my retirement party. My son nodded. It's true, Mom. You're useless, I replied. Then make your parents return the $2 million loan I gave them. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The retirement party was supposed to be my moment. 37 years of working as a bookkeeper at Henderson and Associates, and they'd thrown me this lovely gathering at the country club. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, even a cake with my name spelled out in elegant script. I should have been happy. Instead, I stood frozen in the middle of the reception hall, watching my son, Damon, nod in agreement as his wife, Fallon, called me a bitter old hag. You're just bitter because my parents have money, Fallon had said, her voice carrying across the room like a slap. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed at me accusingly, her designer dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. You've always been jealous of our lifestyle. The room had gone silent. My former colleagues, my neighbors, even the catering staff had stopped what they were doing to stare. Felt heat creeping up my neck, that familiar burn of humiliation I hadn't experienced since I was a child, being scolded in front of the class. Really, Mom? Damon had added, his tone casual, almost bored. You're not useful anymore. Why don't you just accept that? And stop trying to insert yourself into our lives. Not useful anymore. The words echoed in my head as I looked at my son. This 35-year-old man I'd raised alone after his father died when he was just 8. The boy I'd worked double shifts for. The teenager I'd sent to private school even when it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner for weeks at a time. Fallon was still talking, her voice getting shriller with each word. Honestly, Lorna, it's embarrassing how you try to keep up with us. We know you're struggling financially. Damon told me about your little apartment, your old car. Sad, really. She turned to the crowd, playing to them like an actress on stage. She keeps trying to give us advice about money when she can barely afford her own groceries. It's pathetic. A murmur rippled through the room. Could see the pity in people's eyes. The way they looked away when I tried to make eye contact. Mrs. Patterson from next door actually shook her head sadly, as if I were some charity case she'd been wondering how to help. That's when something inside me snapped. Not the explosive kind of snap that makes you scream or throw things. Quiet kind. The kind that feels like a door closing permanently. I took a deep breath and smiled. Not the fake smile I'd been wearing all evening, but a real one. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending. Fallon, sweetheart, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Since you brought up money, I think it's time we discussed something. She rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, here we go. Another lecture from the $2 million. I interrupted, still smiling. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Actually, she did sway a little, gripping Damon's arm for support. What are you talking about? Damon asked, but his voice had lost that casual confidence from moments before. I turned to address the room the same way Fallon had been doing. You see, everyone Fallon's parents needed a rather substantial loan a few years back. $2 million to be exact. They were facing some financial difficulties. Fallon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't. I can and I am, I said pleasantly. Loan was made 3 years ago with very reasonable terms. 5% interest to be paid back over 7 years. Of course, they've only made about 6 months of payments so far. The crowd was staring now, but not at me with pity anymore. They were looking between Fallon and me with fascination, like spectators at a tennis. That's impossible, Fallon whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I opened my banking app and turned the screen toward the crowd. Would anyone like to see the loan documentation? It's all quite legal and above board. Damon stepped closer, squinting at the screen. His face went white as he saw the numbers. Mom, what is this? How do you have 2,437,612.18? Said clearly. That's what your wife's parents currently owe me, including the acred interest they've been ignoring. Fallon made a strangled sound and actually grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. This has to be some kind of mistake. You're a bookkeeper. You live in that tiny apartment. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. I do drive a 15-year-old Honda. Agreed. And I do. Live in a small apartment. But you know what they say about assuming things, dear. The room was dead silent except for the soft jazz music still playing from the speakers, creating an almost surreal backdrop to the scene unfolding. You see, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. Your parents came to me in quite a panic 3 years ago. Their business was failing. They were facing bankruptcy and they needed capital immediately. They'd heard through mutual friends that I might be able to help. Fallon shook her head frantically. No. My parents have money. They've always had money. They paid for our wedding. They bought us the house. With my money, I said simply. Of it. Every dollar your parents have spent in the last 3 years came from that loan. Damon sank into the nearest. His face pale and confused. But you always said you didn't have much. You said you were just getting by. On your pension. I said I lived simply. Corrected. I never said I was poor. Fallon's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. She kept looking around the room as if searching for an escape. Wow, this is insane. You're lying. You're making this up because you're jealous and bitter. And would you like me to call your parents right now? I asked, pulling up their number on my phone. I'm sure they'd be happy to confirm the details. No, Fallon practically shouted, then lowered her voice when she realized how loud she'd been. No, don't call them. Why not, sweetheart? If I'm lying, surely they'd be happy to set the record straight. Fallon's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like a lost child rather than the sophisticated woman who'd been tearing me apart just minutes earlier. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. But I was done with pleasing people who had never shown me the same courtesy. I was done being treated like a burden by the family I'd sacrificed everything for. Looked around the room one more time at all the faces staring back at me with new respect and curiosity. Then I looked at my son, still slumped in his chair, still trying to process what he'd just learned. Enjoy the rest of the party. Everyone, I said, tucking my phone back into my purse. I think I'll head home now. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Fallon's voice behind me, high and desperate. Lorna, wait. We need to talk. We need to. But I didn't. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. And with each step I felt lighter than I had in years. The valet brought my 15-year-old Honda around, and as I drove away from the country club I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow, I thought, was going to be a very interesting day. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat in my small living room with a cup of tea, surrounded by photo albums and financial documents I hadn't looked at in years. The silence felt different now. Not lonely but peaceful. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worried about disappointing anyone. The photos told a story I'd almost forgotten. There I was at 28, holding baby Damon in the hospital, my face exhausted but radiant. My husband, Robert, had died just 2 months earlier in a construction accident, leaving me with a mortgage, a newborn, and exactly $347 in our checking account. I traced my finger over the picture, remembering that terrified young woman. She had no idea what she was capable of. The insurance money from Robert's death had been modest, barely enough to cover the funeral expenses and a few months of mortgage payments. Everyone kept telling me to sell the house, move in with my mother, take whatever help I could get, but something inside me refused. This was Damon's home. This was where his father had painted the nursery walls blue and built shelves for the children's books we'd never gotten to read together. So I kept the house and found a job. Not just any job, but a position at Henderson & Associates, say. Small accounting firm that needed someone willing to work odd hours for lower pay. I started as a receptionist, but I watched everything, learned everything. Numbers had always made sense to me in a way that people didn't. Within 2 years, I was handling the books for 3 of their biggest clients. Within 5, I was essentially running the financial side of the business while Harold Henderson played golf and made client lunches. He paid me well enough to keep the lights on and put food on the table. But I was building something else on the side. Started small. I'd notice inefficiencies in the way clients structured their businesses, tax advantages they were missing, investment opportunities they were overlooking. I started making suggestions, quiet recommendations that saved them thousands of dollars. Word spread. Soon I was doing financial consulting in the evenings and weekends, working with small business owners who couldn't afford the big firms but needed someone who understood money, charged modest fees, and delivered exceptional results. My reputation grew. By the time Damon was in middle school, I was managing investment portfolios for a dozen local businesses. I'd incorporated my own consulting firm, kept it quiet, and funneled the profits into carefully chosen stocks and real estate investments. I lived modestly, drove used cars, and let everyone assume I was just getting by on my bookkeeper salary. The truth was, I was building an empire. A quiet, invisible empire that no one suspected existed. I learned early that people treat you differently when they think you have money. They want things from you, expect things, feel entitled to pieces of your success. I watched wealthy clients at Henderson & Associates deal with the constant pressure from family members, the endless requests for loans and handouts, the way their children grew up expecting everything to be handed to them. I didn't want that for Damon. I wanted him to have a normal childhood, to develop his own work ethic, his own values. So, I hid my growing wealth behind a facade of middle-class struggle. I shopped at discount stores, clipped coupons, complained about the cost of things the way my neighbors did. But I also made sure Damon never wanted for anything important. Private school tuition appeared magically each semester. College funds materialized when needed. And there was always money for the things that mattered. I just made it seem like I was stretching every dollar, sacrificing for his benefit. Looking back now, I can see the flaws in my plan. I was so focused on not spoiling Damon that I may have overcorrected. He grew up thinking I was barely scraping by, that every opportunity he had was the result of my struggle and sacrifice. In a way that was true. But he never understood the scope of what I'd built, the security I'd created for both of us. When Damon graduated college with a business degree, I quietly used my connections to help him land his first job. When he wanted to start his own consulting firm, I arranged for several of my clients to become his first customers. When he decided to expand, I made sure the bank approved his loan application. He thought he was succeeding on his own merit, and in many ways he was. I'd raised him to be smart and hardworking, but I'd also been smoothing his path in ways he never realized. Then came Fallon. I remember the first time Damon brought her home for dinner. She was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that spoke of country club memberships and European vacations. Her clothes were designer, her jewelry real, her confidence unshakable. She looked around my modest apartment with barely concealed disdain, making small comments about the quaint decor and cozy space. During dinner she regaled us with stories about her parents' latest trip to Tuscany, their new yacht, their plans to buy a vineyard. She spoke casually about money in a way that made it clear she'd never worried about it a day in her life. When she mentioned that her father owned several car dealerships across 3 states, I understood where the wealth came from. What I didn't understand was why she seemed so determined to make me feel small. Damon tells me you work as a bookkeeper, she said, the words dripping with barely concealed pity. That must be challenging, making ends meet on that kind of salary. I smiled politely and said it was honest work. I didn't mention that I'd just closed a consulting deal that would net me more in 6 months than most people made in 2 years. After they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been assessed and found wanting. Fallon had looked at my small apartment, my simple lifestyle, and dismissed me as irrelevant. I told myself it didn't matter, that her opinion meant nothing. But as their relationship progressed, I began to see changes in Damon. He started making comments about my situation, asking if I needed help with bills, suggesting I might want to consider moving to a smaller place to save money. The concern in his voice was genuine, but it stung. My own son was beginning to see me through Fallon's eyes. The wedding was a spectacle that cost more than most people's houses. Fallon's parents spared no expense, flying in flowers from Holland and hiring a string quartet that had played for European royalty. I wore a simple dress from a department store and sat in the 3rd row watching my son marry into a world that made my life seem insignificant by comparison. After the wedding, the distance grew. Damon and Fallon moved into a house that Fallon's parents had helped them buy, furnished it with antiques and art that cost more than I'd spent on furniture in my entire life. When I visited, I felt like a tourist in a museum, afraid to touch anything. Fallon was always polite, but in the way you're polite to service providers or distant acquaintances. She'd ask about my job with feigned interest, comment on my cute car, offer to help me shop for better clothes. Every interaction left me feeling smaller, less significant. And Damon, perhaps without even realizing it, began to adopt her perspective. He stopped asking for my advice about business decisions. He stopped calling as frequently. When we did talk, the conversations felt stilted, as if he were speaking to an elderly relative he felt obligated to check on rather than his mother. That's when Fallon's parents reached out to me. It was 3 years ago on a Tuesday evening when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Margaret Wheeler, Fallon's mother, was on the other end, her voice tight with desperation. "Lorna, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said. "But we're in a bit of a situation and someone mentioned you might be able to help." The story came out in fits and starts. Bad investments, market downturns, cash flow problems that had spiraled out of control. The car dealerships were hemorrhaging money. Creditors were circling, and bankruptcy was looming. They needed capital immediately, and traditional lenders had turned them down. "We heard through mutual acquaintances that you might have some resources," Margaret said, carefully. "Connections perhaps, or knowledge of private lenders." Almost laughed. Here was this woman who had looked down on me for years, calling to ask for help from the poor bookkeeper. But something in her voice stopped me. Genuine fear. The terror of losing everything she'd built, everything that defined her family's identity. Could have said no. Should have said no. Probably. But I thought about Damon, about how devastated he'd be if his wife's family lost everything. Thought about Fallon, for all her faults, and how this would shatter the world she'd grown up in. And maybe deep down I thought this might be a bridge, a way to finally be seen as valuable, as someone worth respecting. "How much do you need?" I asked. The amount was staggering. $2 million, more money than most people see in a lifetime. But I had it, sitting in investment accounts that had been growing steadily for decades. We met the next day at a lawyer's office downtown. Margaret and Richard Wheeler sat across from me, their faces pale with stress and humiliation. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in private lending, walked us through the terms. 5% interest payable monthly. Over 7 years, personal guarantees from both Richard and Margaret, full disclosure to immediate family members about the loan structure. Except there was no disclosure. The Wheelers made it clear they wanted to keep the details private to maintain their dignity and their daughter's respect. I understood. Pride is a powerful thing, and they'd already swallowed enough of theirs to ask for help. So we structured it as a private investment in their business with paperwork that would only become relevant if payments were missed. Everyone else, including Fallon and Damon, it would look like the Wheelers had found an angel investor, not that. They were borrowing money from the woman their daughter treated like a charity case. The first few months went smoothly. The payments came on time, the businesses stabilized, and the Wheeler family maintained their lifestyle. Fallon never knew how close they'd come to losing everything or who had saved them. But then the payments started coming late. Then they stopped altogether. Now sitting in my living room with the loan documents spread across my coffee table, I realized what I should have seen from the beginning. The Wheelers hadn't just been borrowing money. They'd been buying time, maintaining appearances, hoping something would change. And when nothing did, they'd simply decided to ignore their obligations. After all, what could the poor bookkeeper do about it? They were about to find out. The morning after my retirement party, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of hurt and confusion that had clouded my judgment was gone, replaced by something sharper and more focused. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and began making phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer, Patricia Collins. I'd used her services for years to structure my investments and consulting contracts, but we'd never been particularly close. That was about to change. "Patricia, it's Laura Hastings. Need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. It's about the Wheeler loan and some other matters that have come." Her voice sharpened with interest. "Has there been a development with the repayment situation?" "You could say that. Can you meet me this afternoon?" "I'll make time." The second call was to Marcus Chen, my financial advisor. Marcus had been managing my investment portfolio for 15 years, and he was one of the few people who truly understood the scope of my wealth. He was also incredibly discreet, which had served me well. "Marcus, I need you to run a comprehensive analysis on all accounts connected to Damon Hastings. Loans he's co-signed, credit lines, investments, everything. I want to understand his complete financial picture. Who is it? Pause on the other end. Lorna, is everything all right? You sound different. Everything is about to be very different. How soon can you have that information? Give me 24 hours. The third call was the hardest. I dialed my son's number, knowing that after last night our relationship had fundamentally changed. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice cautious. Mom, how are you feeling today? I'm feeling quite well, actually. Better than I have in a long time. Kept my tone pleasant but businesslike. I was hoping you and Fallon could come by this evening. There are some things we need to discuss about last night, Mom. Fallon is really upset. She barely slept. Maybe we should wait a few days for things to cool down. No, Damon. Tonight's 7 o'clock. This can't wait. Hung up before he could argue. The meeting with Patricia that afternoon was illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. She spread the Wheeler loan documents across her conference table along with several other files I hadn't seen before. Lorna, there's something you need to know about the Wheeler situation. They've been shopping around for refinancing options for the past 6 months. They've approached 3 different private lenders trying to consolidate their debts. My stomach tightened. What kind of debts? Beyond your loan. They owe approximately $400,000 to various creditors. Credit cards, supplier payments, equipment leases that went into default. Been using your money to service minimum payments on everything else while letting your loan slide. The betrayal stung, but it wasn't the worst part. Patricia pulled out another document. This one stamped with the seal of the probate court. They also filed a preliminary inquiry 6 months ago about challenging estate plans. Specifically, they wanted to understand the process for contesting wills when there are questions about mental capacity. The room seemed to tilt around me. Whose will? They didn't specify, but given the timing and the context, I think we can make some educated guesses. I stared at the document, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. They think I'm losing my mental capacity. It appears they're laying groundwork for that argument. The inquiry specifically asked about situations where elderly individuals make financial decisions that seem inconsistent with their established patterns of behavior, like a poor bookkeeper somehow having $2 million to loan to people. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. The Wheelers weren't just defaulting on their loan. They were planning to claim I'd never been competent to make it in the first place. If they could establish that I was mentally incapacitated when I lent them the money, they could potentially void the entire agreement. Patricia, I want you to do something for me. I want a complete psychiatric evaluation performed by the most respected neuropsychologist in the state. I want cognitive tests, memory assessments, everything. And I want it documented that I requested this evaluation myself, while clearly demonstrating sound judgment. She nodded, making notes. That's smart. It establishes baseline competency and shows you're taking proactive steps to address any concerns. There's more. I want you to prepare a new will, a very specific one. I spent the next hour outlining exactly what I wanted. Patricia's eyebrows rose higher with each instruction, but she dutifully recorded everything. That evening, Damon and Fallon arrived at my apartment exactly at 7. Fallon looked like she'd been crying, her usual perfect makeup slightly smudged. Damon seemed nervous, fidgeting with his car keys. Please sit down, I said, gesturing to my small living room. Can I get you anything to drink? Mom, we really need to talk about. Last night, Damon began immediately. Fallon's parents are very upset. They're saying you're confused about some financial arrangement, but they don't want to embarrass you by stop. My voice cut through his rambling like a knife. Just stop talking for a moment and listen. I walked to my desk and retrieved a folder I'd prepared. These are copies of all the loan documents between your wife's parents and myself. Every page is signed, notarized, and legally binding. I handed the folder to Damon, watching his face as he flipped through the pages. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to dawning realization. This is real, he said quietly. Very real. $2 million borrowed 3 years ago. Payments stopped completely 8 months ago. Current amount owed, including interest and penalties, is $2,612,418. Fallon finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. How do you have this kind of money? I earned it over 30 years of careful investing in business consulting, while you were assuming I was some pathetic old woman barely scraping by. I was building a financial portfolio that would make your parents' car dealerships look like a lemonade stand. Damon set the folder down with shaking hands. But you never said you always acted like money was tight. You live in this small apartment. You drive that old car because I choose to. 'Cause I learned a long time ago that people treat you differently when they know you have money. They start seeing you as a resource rather than a person. I looked directly at Fallon. Her parents came to me because they were facing bankruptcy. They begged me to help them. Promised they would be faithful with payments. Swore this would stay confidential to protect their dignity. I agreed because I thought it would help my son's marriage. Fallon's face had gone completely white. They told me they found an investor, some businessman who believed in the company. I am that businessman, Fallon. I saved your parents from losing everything. Made it possible for them to maintain their lifestyle, to continue funding your expensive tastes, to keep up appearances in your social circle. Damon ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood, when he was overwhelmed. I don't understand. If you have all this money, why did you let us think? Why did you let me worry about your retirement, your future security? The hurt in his voice almost broke my resolve, but I pressed because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. I wanted to know that you valued our relationship, not just my ability to solve your problems with money. And now, Fallon, as her voice hollow, I pulled out my phone and showed them a recording app. Now I know exactly what you both think of me. Last night, in front of 50 people, you called me bitter, pathetic, useless. You made it clear that you see me as a burden, an embarrassment. I played a section of audio from the previous evening, their own voices, filling the small room with their harsh words. Fallon flinched as she heard herself calling me a bitter old hag. I recorded everything, I said simply. The entire conversation is documented. Damon leaned forward, his face desperate. Mom, we were upset. We said things we didn't mean. No, Damon, you said exactly what you meant. You said what you've been thinking for years. What Fallon has been telling you about me, that I'm worthless, that I have nothing to offer, that my presence in your lives is an inconvenience. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. What you don't know is that I've been supporting your lifestyle for years. That consulting firm you started, 3 of your first 5 clients were companies I referred to you. The bank loan for your expansion, I co-signed it quietly through a subsidiary corporation. The silence behind me was deafening. That house you live in, I helped structure the financing in ways that saved you hundreds of thousands in taxes and interest. Your retirement accounts, your investment portfolio, even Fallon's jewelry collection. All of it was made possible by advice, connections, and direct financial support that you never knew about. I turned back to face them. Damon looked stricken while Fallon appeared to be in shock. But here's what's really interesting, I continued, my voice growing colder. I discovered today that your parents haven't just been ignoring their debt to me. They've been actively planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can void the loan entirely. Fallon's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. They filed inquiries with the probate court about challenging wills and estate plans. They've been laying groundwork to claim that I was mentally incapacitated when I made the loan, that I couldn't possibly have had that kind of money to lend. Damon stared at me in horror. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They absolutely could, and they were planning to, with or help. What do you mean? I pulled out the final document from my folder. This is a statement prepared by a private investigator I hired. It details conversations you've had with Fallon's parents over the past 6 months about my declining mental state and your concerns about my erratic behavior with money. Damon's face went ashen. That's not I. Never said you were incompetent. I was just worried about you, about some of the decisions you were making. Like what? Decisions, Damon. Like living in this small apartment when you could afford better. Like driving that old. Or like not taking vacations or enjoying your retirement. It seemed like you were hoarding money irrationally, or maybe not understanding your own financial situation. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. So, when Fallon's parents needed character witnesses to support their claim that I wasn't mentally competent to make large financial decisions, they had your concerned observations to back them up. I didn't know, Fallon whispered. I didn't know they were planning anything like that. But you knew about the loan. Not at first. They told me last month when you stopped returning their calls about payments. They said you were confused, that you thought they owed you money, but it was all a misunderstanding. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A $2 million misunderstanding. They said you were getting old, maybe mixing up your client's money with your own. They were trying to figure out how to handle it gently without embarrassing you or getting you in trouble. How thoughtful of them. Damon stood up suddenly, pacing to the far side of the room. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. Mother is apparently a millionaire. My in-laws are con artists. And my wife's family has been planning to destroy you. Legally. That's a fairly accurate summary. He turned to face me, his expression desperate. What happens now? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and protected, who had stood by and watched his wife tear me apart because he believed I was beneath his notice. Then I looked at Fallon, beautiful and entitled and completely unprepared for the world that was about to come crashing down around her. No. Said quietly, you both learn what it really costs to treat someone as disposable. The next morning I began dismantling the invisible support system I'd built around my son's life with the methodical precision of a surgeon. Removing a tumor. Each cut was clean, calculated, and irreversible. My first stop was First National Bank, where I'd maintained business relationships for over 20 years. James Morrison, the senior vice president, greeted me with a warm familiarity reserved for clients whose portfolios commanded respect. Lorna, wonderful to see you. How was your retirement party? Heard. It was quite the celebration. It was illuminating, James. That's actually why I'm here. I need to make some changes to several accounts and credit facilities. We sat in his office surrounded by mahogany furniture and photographs of James with various local dignitaries. I pulled out a folder containing loan documents and co-signer agreements that Damon had never known existed. I need to remove myself as guarantor from the Hastings Consulting business credit line, I said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. James frowned as he reviewed the documents. This is a substantial facility, Lorna. $750,000. Your guarantee is what made this loan possible. Without it, the loan will need to be restructured based solely on the business's current assets and cash flow, which may not qualify for the same terms or the same amount. That's Mr. Hastings' problem to solve. James studied my face, clearly recognizing that this wasn't a casual business decision. Are you certain about this? Once we process this change, it can't be undone without a complete reapplication process. I'm completely certain. The second stop was Meridian Investments, where Marcus Chen managed my portfolio. His office was more modern than James, all glass and steel and abstract art. But the conversation was equally straightforward. The analysis you requested is complete, Marcus said, handing me a thick report. Your son's financial situation is more precarious than I expected. I flipped through the pages, seeing my suspicions confirmed in black and white. Damon's consulting business was heavily leveraged, dependent on credit lines I'd guaranteed, and clients I'd referred. His personal finances were stretched thin with mortgage payments on a house that was worth less than what he owed, car payments on 2 luxury vehicles, and credit card debt that had been growing steadily. Without the business income from those 3 major clients, his cash flow would be negative within 60 days. Marcus explained. Those 3 major clients were all companies I'd been consulting with for years. Businesses I'd directed to Damon when he was starting out. They'd continued working with him, partly out of loyalty to me, and partly because I'd been quietly ensuring their satisfaction by reviewing his work and making corrections when necessary. I want you to contact Reynolds Manufacturing, Berkshire Holdings, and Patterson Logistics. I inform them that I'll be taking over their accounts directly, effective immediately. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's approximately 60% of Hastings Consulting's revenue. Yes, it is. Lorna, I have to ask, is everything all right? These seem like very drastic measures. Thought about Damon's words from the previous night. The casual dismissal, the assumption that I was useless. Everything is exactly as it should be, Marcus. My third stop was the most difficult. Margaret Wheeler had agreed to meet me for lunch at the country club where my retirement party had taken place just 2 days earlier. She looked older than I remembered, stress lines deepening around her eyes. Her usual perfect composure cracked at the edges. Lorna, thank you for agreeing to meet. I hope we can work this out amicably. We sat at a quiet table overlooking the golf course. The same view I'd had when Fallon called me pathetic in front of all my colleagues. The irony wasn't lost. Me. Margaret, I'm going to be very direct. I know about the probate court inquiries. I know about your plans to challenge my mental competency. And I know you've been using money from my loan to service other debts while ignoring your obligations to me. Her face went pale, but she maintained her dignified composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Placed a folder on the table between us. These are copies of every financial transaction your family has made in the past 6 months, courtesy of a very thorough forensic accountant. Shall I read through them? Margaret's hands trembled. slightly as she reached for her water glass. How did you? That information is private. Not when you're in default on a $2 million loan. It isn't. My attorneys have been very thorough. I opened the folder and began reading. March 15th. Payment to American Express, $22,400. March 18th. Payment to Mercedes-Benz. Financial $8,900. March 22nd. Payment to Fallon's credit card $14,600. Margaret's composure finally cracked. Stop please. April 3rd. Wire transfer to Fallon's account for her European vacation, $28,000. April 7th. Payment to the country club for her bridal shower, $6,200. I said, stop. I closed the folder. Every payment I just listed was made with money from my loan. Money you promised would be used to stabilize your business. Instead, you've been funding your daughter's lifestyle while planning to claim I'm mentally incompetent so you don't have to pay me back. Margaret stared down at her untouched salad. Her voice barely a whisper. We were desperate. The business was failing faster than we expected. We thought if we could just maintain appearances for a while longer something would turn around. And if it didn't turn around, she didn't answer. You were going to destroy my reputation, question my mental capacity, and potentially have me declared incompetent, all to avoid repaying money you borrowed in good faith. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But it did happen like this, and now there will be consequences. I pulled out a formal notice that Patricia had prepared. This is a demand for immediate payment of the full outstanding balance plus penalties. $2,843,712. Due within 30 days. Margaret's face went white. We don't have that kind of money. You know we don't. Then you'll need to liquidate assets. The dealerships, the house, the yacht I've heard so much about. Please, Lorna, there has to be another way. What if we could work out a new payment plan? Margaret, you had a payment plan. You ignored it for 8 months while spending my money on luxury items and planning to have me declared incompetent. There is no new payment plan. She was crying now. Mascara creating dark tracks down her cheeks. This will destroy us. Fallon doesn't know how bad things are. This will ruin her marriage, her whole life. Marriage is built on a foundation of lies and borrowed money. Maybe it's time she learned to live in the real world. Stood to leave, but Margaret grabbed my arm desperately. Wait, there's something else you need to know about Damon. I sat back down, curious despite myself. Fallon has been working on him for months, convincing him that you're becoming unstable. She's been documenting every conversation you've had, every decision you've made that seemed unusual to her. She was building a case. A case for what? For having you declared incompetent. She wanted Damon to petition for guardianship over your affairs. The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. Guardianship. She convinced him that you needed protection from yourself, that you were making poor financial decisions and needed someone to manage your money. Before you lost everything. I felt a cold fury building in my chest. She wanted control of my assets. Thought. We all thought you maybe had a few hundred $000 saved up. Enough to be worth managing, but not enough to matter in the long run. And Damon agreed to this. Margaret nodded miserably. He loves you, Lorna. He really does. But Fallon made it sound like he was protecting you. She showed him articles about elderly financial abuse, stories about seniors who lost their savings to scams. She made him believe that taking control of your finances was an act of love. I stared across the golf course. processing this information. My own son had been prepared to strip away my autonomy, to treat me like a child who couldn't manage her own affairs. All because his wife had convinced him it was for my own good. When was this supposed to happen? Fallon was waiting for one more incident. Something she could point to as evidence of declining capacity. She thought your retirement party might provide the opportunity. And it did, didn't it? Revelation about the loan. She'll claim that's proof I'm delusional. Margaret looked ashamed. That was the plan. Stood again, this time with finality. Thank you for telling me the truth, Margaret. It changes nothing about the loan, but at least now I understand the complete picture. What happens now? Looked down at this woman who had raised the daughter-in-law who was systematically poisoning my relationship with my son, who had taken my money while planning my destruction. Now you face the consequences of your choices. All of you. That evening, I sat in my small apartment reviewing the events of the day. 3 phone calls had already come in from Damon. Apparently, his business credit line had been frozen pending restructuring, and 2 of his major clients had terminated their contracts. I let each call go to voicemail. The 4th call was from Fallon. Her voice was high and panicked. Lorna, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the bank, and my parents are saying crazy things about loans and money, and Damon is having problems with his business. Please call me back. We need to figure this out. I deleted the message and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside my window, the city sparkled in the darkness, full of people living their lives, making their choices, facing their consequences. Tomorrow I would take the next step. Tonight I would enjoy the silence. For the first time in years, no one was taking anything from me. No one was manipulating me, using me, or planning my downfall. I was finally completely in control of my own life. And it felt magnificent. The desperate attempts to reconcile began exactly 72 hours after I'd frozen Damon's credit line. I was in my kitchen, making breakfast when I heard frantic knocking at my door, followed by Fallon's voice calling through the wood. Lorna, please. I know you're in there. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I finished buttering my toast before walking to the door. Through the peephole I could see Fallon pacing on my doorstep. Her usually perfect hair disheveled, her makeup smudged. Looked like she hadn't slept in days. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Hello, Fallon. You look tired. Please, she said, her voice cracking. Please, can we just sit down and talk about this? There's been some terrible misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding. Would you like me to play the recording from my retirement party again? The one where you called me a bitter old hag. She flinched as if I'd lapped her. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. People say things when they're emotional. People reveal who they truly are when they're emotional. That's when the masks come off. Fallon's eyes filled with tears. And for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My parents are losing everything, she whispered. The bank is foreclosing on the dealerships. Talking about selling the house. Damon's business is falling apart. His clients are leaving. His credit line is frozen. We might lose our house too. I imagine that must be very stressful for you. Don't you care? Damon is your son. Don't you care what this is doing to him? Leaned against my doorframe, studying this young woman who had spent 3 years treating me like an embarrassing relative she was forced to tolerate. Tell me, Fallon, when you were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, did you care what that would do to me? Her face went white. Don't know what you're talking about. Your mother told me everything. The guardianship plan, the way you've been documenting my behavior, convincing Damon that I needed protection from myself. You were going to take control of my finances and treat me like a child who couldn't manage her own affairs. Fallon's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? You thought I was some pathetic old woman with maybe a few hundred $000 you could manage for me. Instead, you discovered I have enough money to destroy your entire family's financial stability with a single phone call. Please, she said again, but the word came out strangled. Please what? Please let your family keep the money they stole. Please pretend that you didn't spend 3 years treating me with contempt. Please ignore the fact that you were planning to strip away my autonomy. I stepped back into my apartment. The answer is no, Fallon. To all of it. I closed the door before she could respond, but I could hear her sobbing on the other side. Part of me, the part that had raised Damon alone, that had always tried to be the peacemaker, wanted to open the door and comfort her. But that part of me had died at my retirement party when my own son called me useless. An hour later, Damon arrived. He looked haggard, older than his 35 years, wearing clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. This time I did let him in, but I didn't offer him coffee or ask him to sit down. Mom, you have to stop this. Whatever point you're trying to make, I get it. You're angry. You have every right to be angry. But this is destroying innocent people. Innocent people. I raised an eyebrow. Your wife was planning to have me declared incompetent so she could control my money. Your in-laws borrowed $2 million from me and then planned to claim I was mentally unfit to have made the loan. Where exactly do you see innocence in any of this? Damon ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar from his childhood that my heart clenched despite everything. Didn't know about any of that. I swear to you, Mom, I had no idea what they were planning. But you did think I was becoming mentally unstable. He was quiet for a long moment. I was concerned about some of your choices. Living in this small apartment when you could afford better, driving that old car, not taking vacations. Seemed like you might be having trouble managing your money properly. So, you were prepared to take away my right to make those choices. Thought I was protecting you from what? From living the way I wanted to live, from spending my money the way I chose to spend it, from making decisions that might hurt you in the long run. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to be independent and strong, who had been so easily manipulated into believing his mother was incompetent. Damon, I've been managing money successfully for 30 years. I built a consulting business from nothing. I accumulated wealth that you can't even comprehend. I made investments that turned thousands into millions. And you thought I needed your protection. I didn't know about any of that success. You never told me. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. I wanted our relationship to be real. His voice cracked. It is real, Mom. I do love you. No, Damon. You love the version of me that you can feel superior to. The struggling bookkeeper who needed your concern and your management. You don't love the successful businesswoman who's been supporting your career behind the scenes for years. That's not true. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared. These are copies of every favor I've done for you, every client I've referred, every loan I've guaranteed, every obstacle I've quietly removed from your path. For 15 years. I've been ensuring your success while letting you believe you were doing it all on your own. Damon took the folder. With trembling hands, flipping through pages of bank documents, client referral letters, and guarantee agreements he'd never known existed. Why? He whispered. Because I wanted you to have confidence in yourself. I wanted you to believe in your own abilities, but I also wanted to protect you from failure. And now you get to find out what you can actually accomplish without my help. Mom, please. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at this man who shared my eyes and my stubborn chin, who had been the center of my world for 35 years. Means everything, Damon. That's why this hurts so much. Then don't do this. Don't destroy my marriage, my business, my whole life over something that can't be undone. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply stopping my support. You're a grown man with a college degree and 15 years of business experience. If you can't maintain your lifestyle without secret help from your mother, then maybe that lifestyle was never really sustainable. What about Fallon? She made mistakes, but she loves me. She's pregnant, Mom. I felt my heart skip a beat. What? She's 8 weeks pregnant. We just found out yesterday. She's terrified about what's happening with our finances with her parents. The stress isn't good for the baby. For a moment, the room was completely silent. A grandchild. Another chance at family, at love that wasn't tainted by manipulation and greed. Then I remembered Fallon calling me pathetic. Damon agreeing that I was useless. Guardianship papers that would have stripped away my autonomy. Congratulations, I said quietly. Please, for the baby's sake, can't we find a way to work this out? I walked to the window, looking out at the city that had been my home for so many years. Somewhere out there, Margaret and Richard Wheeler were probably meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. Somewhere else, Fallon was crying over bank statements and foreclosure notices. Make you a deal, I said finally. Damon's face lit up with hope. Full repayment of the Wheeler loan within 60 days. $2,843,712. His face fell. You know they don't have that kind of money. Then they'll need to liquidate assets, houses, businesses, investments, jewelry, everything. That will leave them with nothing. They'll have their health and their freedom. That's more than they were planning to leave me with. What about my business? What about the guarantees you withdrew? Your business succeeds or fails based on your own merit now. Well, more help from me and us. What about our relationship? I turned back to face him, memorizing his features as if I might never see him again. That depends entirely on you, Damon. Whether you can love and respect the real me, not just the version you thought you could control. He was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. I never wanted to control you. I thought I was helping. I know you did. That's what makes this so tragic. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment as the afternoon faded into evening. The silence felt different now. Heavier. I was getting what I'd demanded. Respect, recognition, consequences for those who had wronged me. But the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. A grandchild was coming, and I might never know him or her. My son might never forgive me for this. Family I'd spent 35 years building and protecting was crumbling around me. But for the first time in years, no one was taking advantage of me. No one was manipulating me or planning my downfall. I was finally free to be exactly who I was without apology or explanation. The question was freedom worth the price of being alone? I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sun set over the city, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new consequences. But tonight I was simply Laura Hastings, successful businesswoman, millionaire, survivor, and that would have to be enough. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Meridian Tower, wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The marble floors gleamed beneath my feet, reflecting the crystal chandeliers that cast warm light across the space. This was my building now, one of 3 commercial properties I'd purchased in the past month. The elevator carried me to the 15th floor, where glass doors bore the inscription Hastings Financial Consulting, Private Wealth Management. My new office occupied the entire floor with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city I'd called home for so many years. My assistant, Claire, a sharp woman in her 40s who'd come highly recommended, greeted me with my morning schedule. "Good morning, Mrs. Hastings. You have the Peterson consultation at 10 o'clock, lunch with the Mayor's Economic Development Committee at noon, and the Forbes interview at 3. Thank you, Claire. Any messages? Several. Your lawyer called about the Wheeler bankruptcy proceedings. Everything is finalized. Your accountant needs to review some tax implications for the new acquisitions." And she hesitated. "Your son called again. That's the 4th time this week." I nodded, taking the message slip without looking at it. "Hold my calls until after the Peterson meeting." The transformation had been gradual at first, then sudden. After Damon left my apartment that day, I'd made a decision that changed everything. I was done hiding who I was. Within a week I'd hired the best image consultant in the city, updated my wardrobe and had professional photographs taken, registered Hastings Financial as a full-service wealth management firm, and begun reaching out to the network of contacts I'd built over 3 decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Apparently, whispers of the mysterious investor who'd been making smart money moves behind the scenes had been circulating for years. When I emerged from the shadows, clients lined up to work with the woman who'd quietly built a fortune while maintaining the discretion they valued. My first major coup was convincing 3 family trusts worth a combined $800 million to move their portfolios to my firm. Word spread quickly through the wealthy circles of the city. Lorna Hastings was the real deal. The Wheeler bankruptcy had been swift and brutal. Unable to meet my payment demands, they'd been forced to liquidate everything. The car dealership sold to a competitor for cents on the dollar. The house went to pay creditors. The yacht, the art collection, even Margaret's jewelry. All of it went to auction. They'd moved to a modest apartment across town, both taking jobs they were overqualified for, but desperate to move. Richard worked as a sales manager at a used car lot owned by his former competitor. Margaret worked part-time at a real estate office, showing houses she could never afford to live in again. Fallon had been devastated. The pregnancy had been difficult, complicated by stress and the dramatic change in her circumstances. She'd lost the designer clothes, the spa treatments, the lifestyle that had defined her identity. Worst of all, she'd had to watch her parents' humiliation, knowing it was partially her fault. Damon's business had struggled initially after losing my support, but he'd proven more resilient than I'd expected. He'd downsized, moved to a smaller office and focused on building genuine relationships with clients rather than relying on my referrals. It was harder work, less profitable but more honest. They'd sold the house I'd helped them buy and moved to a modest 3-bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood. Damon drove a used sedan instead of his luxury car. Fallon shopped at Target instead of Nordstrom, but they were surviving. The baby had been born 3 months ago, a healthy daughter they'd named Emma. The birth announcement had been simple, sent by mail with a small photograph. No elaborate celebration, no expensive gifts from grandparents. Just a quiet welcome for a new life entering an uncertain world. I'd stared at that photograph for a long time, memorizing my granddaughter's tiny features, wondering if I'd ever hold her, ever know her laugh or comfort her tears. The Forbes interview that afternoon was supposed to focus on my business success, but the journalist was more interested in the personal story. You've become something of a legend in financial circles, she said, her recorder capturing every word. The bookkeeper who secretly built an empire. What drove you to keep it hidden for so long? I considered the question carefully. I learned early that people's perception of you changes when they know you have money. They start seeing you as a resource rather than a person. Wanted my relationships to be based on who I was, not what I had. And did that strategy work? I smiled, but there was sadness in it. It revealed exactly what my relationships were really worth. You've been estranged from your son for 6 months now. Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation? I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret standing up for myself. Would it take for reconciliation? I thought about that question long after the interview ended. What would it take? An apology would be a start, but not enough. Real change. Genuine respect. Acknowledgement of the damage that had been done. Those things took time to develop and even longer to prove. Evening, I was reviewing acquisition proposals in my penthouse apartment. I'd finally moved out of my modest rental. When my doorman called. Mrs. Hastings, there's a young woman here with a baby. Says she's your daughter-in-law. I send her up. I hesitated for a long moment. Yes, send her up. 5 minutes. Later, I opened my door to find Fallon standing in my hallway, holding a pink bundle in her arms. She looked different, older, more tired, but somehow more real. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. And there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Humility. Hello, Lorna. Thank you for seeing me. Come in. She walked into my new living room, taking in the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their stunning view. But her attention quickly returned to the baby in her arms. This is Emma, she said quietly. Your granddaughter. I stared down at the sleeping infant, feeling my heart constrict with a longing I'd been suppressing for months. She had Damon's nose and what looked like my chin. She's beautiful. Would you like to hold her? With trembling hands, I reached for my granddaughter. She was so light, so perfect, so completely innocent of all the pain and betrayal that had brought us to this moment. Owe you an apology, Fallon said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just for what I said at your party, but for everything. For the way I treated you, the way I convinced Damon to see you as a burden instead of the remarkable woman you are. I looked up from the baby to study Fallon's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. I was spoiled and entitled and cruel. She continued, I thought money and status were the only things that mattered. I looked down on you because I thought you had less than me. And I was threatened when I discovered you had more. And now I understand what my parents did to you, what I participated in doing to you. We took advantage of your generosity and your love for Damon. We planned to take away your autonomy. We treated you like you were disposable. She was crying now. Silent tears that she didn't try to wipe away. I know you have every right to hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. And I wanted you to meet your granddaughter. I held Emma closer, breathing in that sweet baby scent, feeling her tiny heartbeat against my chest. What does Damon know about this visit? Nothing. He doesn't know I'm here. He thinks you'll never forgive us. That we've lost you forever. And what do you think? Fallon was quiet for a long moment. I think that would be fair. I hope maybe someday you might give us a chance to earn your trust back. That would take time. Years. Probably. You know. And it would require real change. Not just words, actions. Proof. Understand. Emma stirred in my arms, making soft baby sounds. I looked down at her perfect face and felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, the hurt, the betrayal, but love was there too. Not for Fallon, not yet. But for this innocent child who deserved better than the legacy of pain her family had created. I'm not ready to forgive, I said finally. I may never be ready, but I am ready to consider the possibility that people can change. Fallon's face lit up with hope. Steps, I warned. Supervised visits with Emma. Family counseling with Damon. Complete transparency about your finances and decisions. And if there's ever another betrayal, any attempt to manipulate or take advantage, it ends permanently. Yes, she said immediately. Yes, absolutely. And Fallon? Yes, I'm not the same woman who used to hide her success to make others comfortable. I won't pretend to be less than I am ever again. If we're going to rebuild this relationship, it will be with full honesty about who we all really are. She nodded, wiping her tears. I wouldn't want it any other way. As she prepared to leave, I made a decision that surprised even me. Fallon. Turn back hopefully. Tell Damon he can call me. Not to apologize or make excuses, but to talk about Emma, about being grandparents, about what comes next. Her smile was radiant. I will. Thank you. After they left, I stood in my beautiful apartment surrounded by all the symbols of my success, holding a small pink blanket that still smelled like baby powder. The silence felt different now, not empty but full of possibility. I'd learned that liberation wasn't just about breaking free from those who'd wronged me. It was about choosing who to let back in, on what terms, and with what expectations. Tomorrow Damon would call. We would have difficult conversations about trust and forgiveness and the long road back to being a family. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be no guarantees. But for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Oh, the city sparkled beyond my windows, full of people making their own choices, facing their own consequences, rebuilding their own lives. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of human experience, my granddaughter was sleeping peacefully, dreaming baby dreams in a world where her grandmother was finally, completely, authentically herself. That was enough. That was everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Share your stories with our family in the comments. The story continues in the next chapter in the next linked video. But first, I need you to subscribe to join the family as we are looking forward to hit our first 10,000 subscribers target, and feel free to share your story in the comments. You matter, your voice does too.